Right. And this time I will try not to talk too loud, which I never could understand why people would be worried about that, since the acoustics in this room are awful. So a couple of things. It's the end of the year, and I wanted to reflect on a couple of things. Digital Family Reunion, I don't know how many of you went this past week, but it's a fun group of people from Web, basically 1.0. Back in the late 90s, a whole group of people popped up in LA and started to do internet investing. And one of the things that I didn't think got enough coverage at the Digital Family Reunion was who was the catalyst for making LA a tech center at the time. And it was my partner, Bill Gross. A lot of you guys might remember Idea Lab. When Bill started Idea Lab in 1996, it was, he called it an incubator. No one knew at the time really what that concept meant. But I think it's kind of funny now because Bill's idea was, I'm going to give companies very little capital. The internet doesn't need a lot of capital, internet-based companies, and I'm going to start 50 businesses. And it's funny to me now because I hear a whole bunch of people who are now starting incubators, I'll call them the young guys, who describe that as a new concept. And actually, Bill, I think, really pioneered this idea. There were incubators before that. In fact, I was in Washington, D.C. before I came out to L.A. And at that time, there were incubators, but the incubator concept back then meant we'll provide you office space and secretarial support. Whereas Bill said, I'll help you build your companies. In fact, the first 50 or so ideas that Bill had, he didn't even go outside the incubator for the concept. He just kind of whiteboarded 50 business concepts and said, let's hire people. At the time, he went to Caltech, his alma mater. He was based in Pasadena. And he went and said, hey, any CS or EE grads who want to start a company, I've got $250,000 for you. What I also thought was very cool is where Bill got the money. It was actually from the Hollywood crowd. Bill had taken, what was it, Knowledge Adventure. He had started Knowledge Adventure in the early 90s. That was a children's game company, and he raised a lot of angel funding at the time, but back then it was really, the only people who really had a lot of money in LA were entertainment people. So when he started Idea Lab, he raised about $10 million, mostly from like celebrities, sort of old-time Hollywood peeps, and Goldman Sachs. So they get some credit, even though they've been pilloried this past year for a lot of bad stuff they've done. They were instrumental.
What kind of ROI was there?
What's that?
Return to their investment did they get?
Well, they received a huge return on investment.
Like what companies came out of Idea Labs and were monoliths?
Well, I mean, there's so many, but of course, Bill invented the concept of pay-for-placement search, right? So that was through Overture. I can remember the very first day that company started. One brief anecdote. So you all know now, of course, how that works. You rank order searches based on how much you pay. And this was a really wild concept. I can remember the Red Herring, if you remember that organization. The Red Herring magazine saying, this is such a stupid idea. Why would you want to rank order searches based on how much people will pay? What you'll wind up is with this kind of unfair search ranking. But they never thought through what Bill had, which was, would you rather have it be random, which at the time it really was, or would you rather have it be based on what people are willing to pay? Because if they pay something, it's only possible for them to continue to do that if people click on the topic.
What's Red Herring writing about that now?
Yeah, exactly. Where is Red Herring? Where is Red Herring? So, but it's kind of funny. I knew we were Idea Lab Capital Partners, the venture capital firm. And we had, it's a different story, but we had started the venture capital firm with Bill in order to go and basically invest in his companies after they got a little bit out ahead of the incubation stage. And the first thing we did when he launched, he started the business Overture that morning, and I went online and said, oh, I'll buy the word venture capital. And this is kind of those magical things about the web. There was no advertising or anything, he just launched it. There was probably 6 or 7 guys who started the company, in the lab. And I paid, I think it was 25 cents for the word venture capital. Thought this was kind of cool. And then I got a little note like 2 minutes later, oh, the word is now at 50 cents. And I was like, holy shit. So I then went and, re-upped, and it got to about $3 or $4. And then I thought, who the hell could know this word, right? Ultimately, I called Tim Draper and said, hey, what's going on? Because they had just invested in Overture with us. And they're like, yeah, we're bidding on that word. So I have a feeling that venture capital was the first word ever bid on, which is very, very funny. So that's the story of Overture, but there were many, many other companies, Net Zero, City Search, PayPal wasn't, it was funded by us, but it wasn't incubated. Probably the biggest one that went up and down from 0 to 15 billion market cap to look at Alex shaking his hand, back to 0, eToys, right. Bill, though, I think should get press for what he did. He was instrumental in creating a catalyst in Los Angeles where there really had not been any center, right? It's now sort of moved to Santa Monica, but at the time, it was, you go to the Bay Area if you want to raise venture capital. There were like a smattering of companies in Southern California, but no center. And I think up and through the dot-com bubble, Bill's Idea Lab really was the shining light. And I think a lot of companies have since spawned off from that and made LA, it's stuck, right? The venture capital idea, a lot of firms got funded because of Idea Lab. We were saying, look at all the great activity that's going on in Southern California. So he gets a lot of credit, even though he's not as well, I think, appreciated.
I think Outliers did a good job of explaining Bill. I'm not sure who's read Outliers. It's a great book, but there's a whole chapter specifically on him and how he saw things. And he was born in 1955, and how that's like the magic year for a lot of these guys.
Ah, okay. I didn't even know that. So a few other things I want to touch on, by the way. Back when Bill started Idea Lab, 1996. LA was in a serious recession. For those of you who are here, it was awful. Here's one little tidbit. When I left LA, and I left LA in 1994, but from about 1993 to probably 98, LA was in a really bad recession. And when I left, that Sunday, the Sunday paper had 3 pages of classified ads. And I remember, LA being the second largest city in America, I had lost the concept of how many should be there. But I went to Boston, and when I landed that Sunday, I just happened to look at the classifieds, and there were 70 pages of classified ads for jobs I'm talking about. 3 pages in LA. The housing market had totally collapsed in LA, right? Very similar. And the USC football program sucked. So a lot of what is happening right now in LA was going on back in 1996 when the internet spawned this whole great new wave of company formation. So I just wanted to tip my hat to him for basically reinvigorating LA, because a lot of us don't remember this. But in the 80s, before I started in venture capital, LA also had a pretty vibrant technology arena. And then the 87 crash happened, we went into a recession, and all the capital dried up. I remember looking at a guide to venture capital, and there were about 50 venture capital firms in LA in 1984. And by 1992, there was about 4 or 5.
How many are now, do you think?
I'd say there's probably about 25. So it's still not reached.
But with 5 major players, probably, right?
Up and down, there's probably almost 10.
10 major players.
Yeah, between San Diego and called Santa Barbara.
Oh.
So, right, not just LA proper.
Is there a reason why you don't just say LA? Why? I'm being serious, because I think the mentality of what San Diego invested